Hi, everyone. The activity that Tara and I will be sharing with you is called Dictogloss, and this was developed by a linguist in Australia by the name of Ruth Wanrib. She was an educator who worked at uh, several universities and also had a regular column in the Sydney Morning Herald for many years. The column was on language, and she's also known for her books and articles. One of her books that was very well received and had great reviews was on the history of foul language. And it is said that it was very well researched and it was written in a very engaging and entertaining style. So this activity brings together different skills that are important for enhancing our language abilities. It integrates listening, reading, writing, speaking, and note taking. And this is all done individually by students and also working together with their peers, as we will explain later. And these skills that are practiced in this activity are useful for both English language learners and native English speakers. Dictogloss is based on repetition and listening carefully to what is being read aloud. A short passage is read aloud about 2 to 3 times, and students listen, and then they try to reconstruct what they heard. And they try to be as accurate as possible. They're not asked to write down exactly what they heard, but they try to write as much as the same information as they can. They try to be as accurate as possible, and they try to word their recollection appropriately. And so that's the goal, not to reproduce exactly what they heard, but to represent and recall and represent and record it as well as possible. The passage that is read aloud to students should be on something that they're familiar with. It shouldn't be an entirely new topic. It could be something that's written just for this practice, this exercise, or it could be from something that they're reading in one of their classes, or it could be just any general text that students have some familiarity with. So the activity begins with a reading of the passage about 2 times at a normal speed. And at this point, the students are just listening carefully. They're not writing anything down, they're just listening carefully. The third time that the passage is read, students will write down keywords, phrases as it's being read. And they're writing down important words, important phrases that they feel should be taken note of. And these don't have to be in complete sentences. They're just jotting down what they think is important. And at this point, there's no focus on correct spelling, grammar, or any worry about what it looks like, their handwriting. They're just taking note of what sounds important. After this, students are paired up. They work in pairs to share their notes on what they have written down based on what they remember, and they try to reconstruct the original text. And as they are doing this, they're reminded to look at their language and how they're using language, whether it makes sense, their reconstruction, their wording, how does it sound? And so at this stage, they're beginning to look at their composition, their language, how they're representing the information that they heard, their sentence structure, grammar, etc. And they're also thinking of whether, the meaning of the text, whether their reconstruction makes sense. And if they don't remember any part of the reading, they can try to guess the words based on the meaning that they remember of the text. And so by doing so, they're practicing their language skills, their skills of listening, writing, reviewing their reading, etc. Then these pairs of students working together are brought together to form groups of four students, and they continue what they were doing in the last stage. They uh, share their notes, they review what they've written, and they're still trying to reconstruct that original passage as accurately as they can. Again, not necessarily identical language, but as accurate as possible in a way that that their language is appropriately worded in terms of sentence structure, grammar, and the students are, since they're working together, they have more material, more notes to look at, to share with one another, to talk to one another about. And so all the different skills that we mentioned in the beginning are being used and practiced. They're talking about language, they're talking to one another and helping one another, listening, reading, writing. All of this is happening at this stage. So now, after working in pairs and working in groups of four, the students can work either on their own or continue working with their classmates to reconstruct the passage using all these notes that of their own, uh, notes that they've collected together and shared with one another. And now the goal is to actually reconstruct that original passage as closely as possible. Again, not necessarily in an identical form, but in a way that is representing as much information from the original passage as possible in an appropriately worded and structured manner. It should be accurate, and the students should look at their grammar and spelling and should compare what they've written down with what was on the original, uh, what was in the original passage, and that should be displayed on a screen or a board, and the students can compare their work, which some of them may have written it on a large sheet of paper, or they can just continue looking on their own individual sheets. But the idea is to compare their reconstruction with the original text. And as students are comparing their work with the original passage, the teacher can uh, remind them that what the goal and the aim of this exercise was. It wasn't to reproduce the original text word for word, but the idea was to have that same information, as much of it as possible, and to practice wording it in an appropriate manner. And as students are comparing their work with the original text, the teacher can point out that um, their reconstructions could vary, that there's no one correct way. There may be differences between the reconstructions of the different students, and there may be differences that they find between the original text and their own, but the idea was to be as accurate as possible and to develop our skills. And but in doing so, the teacher should also point out instances where the information may not have been accurately represented. So a mix of positive, um, some encouragement and praise, but also showing students differences that may have been misrepresentations, and also and how to kind of revise that and correct that.